All right, and welcome to this little excursion that we're going to be going on. This is a fellow that I like following on YouTube, and the video is how to install pavers. And he basically, his company does the same work as we do, as to say, construction practice. So I like the way this guy does his work. It's a recording that I chose to show as as a good follow-up on how we do the work, as to say, installing patio pavers, walkways, driveways. And there's a lot of good notes in here. Later on in the next session, we'll be talking about materials. In this video, you're going to see all or most of the materials that we like to use, and I'll be periodically pausing the video so that we can talk about it, and then we'll learn more about it on the next session. But in the meantime, let's get on with this video. Let's get down to business.
What's happening, hardscapers? I'm here today to talk to you about how you can build your own interlock paver, driveway, patio, walkway, whatever it might be. Everything you need to know, and different base preparation methods are going to be included in this to help you get started with the basics. Now, if you want to learn more about this, you can check out our website, howtohardscape.com.
Those slabs that he was putting down, we don't use them. They are becoming popular in the industry. A lot of DIY projects are done this way because you don't have to dig down as deep. But as practice, we go down as deep as you have to if you're going to do it for a homeowner and get paid for it. So I don't use those pads that he was just showing, but by all means, if you choose to use those, go right ahead.
Or even check out the Hardscape Academy. They have two great resources there in how to install pavers.
These poles here are fence poles, and we'll be talking about that in the next session as well. When you're screeding, these are great poles to use because they allow you to get the grade of this pole next to that pole, and also enable you to get your slope from highest point to lowest point, and just basically pull the screed across to get a perfect grade, as to say the grade that you need or you're trying to achieve.
Pavers and how to install retaining walls that you can go check out. Link is in the
Geotextile, we'll be talking about that as well, along with filter cloth and different materials that you can use in order to maintain full strength structure below for your patio, or it be retaining walls or armor stone, or as to say layered armor stone. We'll be talking about all that as well.
description for those, and let's get started. Now, when it comes to preparing your interlock, paver, patio, walkway, driveway, it all starts with preparation in deciding what you are going to do to install, what base preparation method you're going to use, what materials, and so on. So first thing is first, it comes down to a site visit, being able to understand slope and whether or not you're going to be able to lay pavers on grade, or if you're going to need to create a raised patio of some sort, or steps, or whatever it might be for your walkway, patio. Driveways we do not have to worry about. Driveways are actually a very easy thing to figure out because you have a starting point, which is the bottom of the garage floor, and you have an ending point, which is the sidewalk or the road. So your slope is already predetermined with a driveway. Now when it comes to a walkway or a patio, this is where slope becomes incredibly important.
So he's going to be talking about a swale, and we talk about that later on as well in the next session. Whether it be the side of two homes or in a backyard, the swale is basically a water path for rainwater to escape. So it's predetermined when a home is built. The swale is not to be interrupted, and if you find that you've got too much slope, you may need a retainer across here so that you can get the desired height that you need in order to do a walkway in this example. If it was the backyard and you've got too much slope, this is where a grading stick comes in order to be able to determine how much slope you really do have and whether you're going to need a step up or a retaining wall to support your patio or walkway.
If it's a side walkway, you need to worry about the swale. The swale may not allow you to be able to install a wide enough walkway. So that may include having to build a retaining wall to allow you to get a flat surface for your walkway that slopes away from the foundation ever so slightly to keep water away from the foundation. Same thing goes for a backyard patio. If your slope of your backyard is extremely steep, you may need to build a retaining wall to be able to level out that area to give you a nice patio. So for the purpose of this, we're going to be only talking about patios on grade, or walkways, driveways, being able to lay them exactly as is with the slope of the yard. We need to understand slope yard is
that up a little bit
goes for a backyard patio. If your slope of your backyard is
how would you know if you're on site for the first time if it's too much slope that you do need a step up? Well, that's where a grade stick comes in, or a transit stick. They usually come with an optical that you can see, and you can set up several different points in the yard to see how much height you've got difference from the back of the house to how far out you're going to be coming. And they actually have automatic ones too, where it kind of makes a beeping noise, and one person can do that on their own. If you have it on you while you're on visiting a site, and you really need to determine whether you need a retainer or not, at that point you take it out and you try it and check it out.
Extremely steep, you may need to build a retaining wall to be able to level out that area.
Now, I like this shot because he's using this geotex material where he's going over the retainer. He'll be putting coping or capping on top of this, and since it's going underneath all the gravels and such, that's going to help give strength and structure to your wall or your retainer from tipping over with gravity or as time goes by. So this geotext is actually going right over the wall and will be glued in place with the capping, and it keeps all of this structure solid for years to come.
To give you a nice patio. So for the purpose of this, we're going to be only talking about patios on grade, or walkways, driveways, being able to lay them exactly as is with the slope of the yard. We need to understand slope of the actual patio itself to be able to understand where that patio is going to end.
Back up a little bit again. The distance,
slope of the actual patio itself.
The distance that he's kept away from the fence, for my liking, is a bit tight. I like leaving it out at least 6 inches so that I can put proper brick stop before throwing this, it looks like pea gravel or decorative stone in between. And also up against the fence, which is buried, you shouldn't be able to see it, is going to be some sort of retaining structure, whether it be a 2x6 or a 2x8, whatever you need, so that your gravels don't fall through, especially if someone wants to rebuild this fence. If they take this fence section out, that everything doesn't come falling out and destroying this patio. So I stay back a little bit further, put my brick stop in order to hold the patio and my materials away. Plus I would put a wooden, in this case, because you've got the posts, retainer with my decorative stone in between.
To be able to understand where that patio is going to end, if we're going to need to build up a little bit more of soil for that patio, or where our starting point is against that foundation of the house. Now to do this, we need to understand that a patio is a minimum of 1/8 of an inch per foot slope to a maximum of 1/4 of an inch per foot slope. No more, no less than.
So for every foot, you want a slope of at least 1/8 to 1/4 inch of a slope leading away from the house or where you want the water to dissipate to. So for every foot, the rule of thumb is 1/4 inch.
Those, I like to have 3/16 of an inch for every foot in mine, kind of getting in that middle point between those for my patios.
Now you can see here he's using the fence poles as well for his rough grade, and so do I. We want to get as close to the grade as possible prior to doing our final grade of gravels. So if this is a gravel that he's using, he's actually used the poles, and we do too, and come to as close to the grade that you want to achieve prior to laying the final grade of gravel and then your pavers. Great practice to do.
Now to do this, the most basic method of measuring would be to use string line. So we'll put a post at the foundation of the house where our patio is starting, and we'll put a post where our patio is going to end, and we'll lay a string line and put our string line level on that to make sure that it is level. Once our string line is level, we can then measure the distance from the house to the end of the patio and say that is 8 feet, and we're going to do an 1/8 of an inch slope for every foot. That means that from the house to the end of the patio is going to be 1 inch lower.
Now, an 1/8 is minimum. So you mean you're going to have a slow dissipation of water or runoff of water on 1/8 slope for every foot. So if that's 8 feet away and he's only gone down 1 inch, I would try bringing it down a wee bit more. But any more than that, it's going to feel like a slope. And you don't want it to, when you're on the patio, you don't want it to feel like it's slopey, or when you're sitting on it to feel like you're sitting crooked. So 1 inch is going to be the minimal, or 1/8 in this case, that he's done.
So we're going to lower that string line at the end of the patio 1 inch down to get that. Now that is just a minimum slope example, and easy numbers there to make it nice and easy for us for this example, but for yours you'll have to measure from the house to the end of the string line and calculate your slope based on that 3/16 of an inch for every foot, or whatever you decide for your patio. That gives you your starting point at the foundation, ending point at the back of the patio, and now you can adjust that as you see fit to be able to minimize the amount of steps that you need coming out of the house, or to minimize the amount that you need to build up at the end of the patio. However it may be, you can then put 4 different pegs for the 4 different corners of your patio with that slope. Now the top of string line should represent top of paver. So from the top of paver down, you're actually going to be digging the height of the paver, which is typically 2 3/8 of an inch, the 1 inch bedding course or screed layer, and then 6 to 8 inches of base material is what we do for our paver projects in our business. Now that may vary depending on your location. Where I operate my business, we have multiple freeze-thaw cycles. To accommodate that, we do a minimum of 6-inch base to a max of 8-inch base for patios and walkways.
So wherever your location is, up more in the north area where you do get snow and freeze, you're going to want to go down as low as you can. A good practice is where we are, it's very clay based. You're hitting clay, you're pretty far down, and you shouldn't have to worry about a frost. If you're in Florida, I don't think you need to go down 12 to 14 inches because you don't have any worries about frost. And what happens is, the biggest problem is you get a snowfall in the late fall, early winter, and it freezes up, and then it starts melting again, and then it freezes up and it starts melting again. That's where you get a lot of shifting. Go down to your 12 to 14 inches, come up with the proper drainage gravels, and you'll be okay. You should be okay.
Driveways, we're doing 12 to 14 inches of base. We've got that 2 3/8 of an inch paver, that 1 inch of bedding layer, and that 6 to 8 inches of base. If we go to that max of 8 inches plus that 1 inch, and then the 2 3/8, we're at 11 3/8 of an inch of excavation needed. And we want our excavation to be uniform, to match the slope of the top of the patio where the pavers are going to lay. So that slope is going to be consistent, going away from the foundation, keeping water away from our foundation. We want that to be as consistent as possible in our install. When it comes to excavation, you're going to want to excavate past your project where the final paver will be, the depth of your base. So if your base is 6 to 8 inches, you're going to excavate 6 to 8 inches past that final paver. What this does is it gives your paver a nice solid platform to sit on, that they're not going to start to migrate outside of.
The other reason why you want to go further, and 6 to 8 inches is a good amount, is because you're going to be nailing your pave edge as well, or your brick stop up against your paver. So in order to do that, you want to put it into something solid. Well, if you've got a footing, that footing should come over further than your patio to begin with, or walkway, whatever it may be. This way you can get your spikes into something solid as well, and keep some of that soil. Don't throw it all away, because you're going to have to backfill afterwards and either sod it or seed it. So you're not going to get rid of all your soils. Determine how much soil you're going to need to fill back in. Keep that amount somewhere on a piece of plywood or on the driveway or on the road, somewhere where you can go back and get it at the end of your project in order to backfill all across wherever you need to finish your project.
That base material with traffic going on them, stepping on them, and sliding them out. If you're doing a driveway of 12 to 14 inches, you're excavating 12 to 14 inches past that final paver to get a good solid base and platform for your pavers. Once we've excavated our base material, we are then going to compact our subsoil. And if we have a heavy clay soil, we may need to amend that with a cement mix or type S mortar mix, mixed in with 3/4 inch clear stone and compacted into that clay material to increase the bearing load ability of it. Now, this compaction of the subgrade material is incredibly important and it can't be overlooked. You also don't want to compact the subsoil too much to decrease the amount of water penetration going through it.
So what happens if you're on top of clay? So you've reached the bottom. It's basically undisturbed earth, which is clay in this particular point, where he's tamping and tamping. You keep tamping, you're going to get a bounce, and that's because you're softening everything up underneath the clay, and water might even start coming up if there's any water underneath it, but you're going to get a bounce or a soft, too much soft. So he's mixing it in with a gravel in order to get a stronger or more solid compaction.
Couple of passes with a compactor is working really well with this. Now, if you have a heavy clay soil, you can roll it up into a ball really firmly. You may want to use a ramming compactor to be able to compact this. This really needs the clay and gets the clay particles compacted properly, or a heavy reversible compactor for heavy clay materials. If you have a sandy subsoil, you can get away with a reversible compactor.
Now, those mini excavators are great. They can fit in between a fence gate and a home pretty tight. They're 31 to 34 inches wide. And in this case, they're using a bin, which is a great idea if you have more, even if you have a dump trailer, if you have more soil needing to be taken out than your dump trailer can handle, because you don't want to be running back and forth with your dump trailer getting rid of loads. So it is more cost effective to have a bin on site. And if you can get it as close to where you're digging as possible, great, because you can just dump it right in. If not, you'll have wheelbarrows going back and forth, dumping it in front of the bin. And once this excavator is done at the backyard, you bring it to the front and then start throwing it in with the excavator itself.
Of medium size to compact that subsoil. What we use is a ramming compactor for our clay projects, and if we come across any sandy soil, we have a medium size reversible plate compactor that has a force of 3,500 pounds, which, if we calculate that when compacting our base material, a good rule of thumb is for every 1,000 pounds of force, it's good for 1 inch of base material compaction. So whatever you're using to compact, if you have a compactor that is only good for 1,000 pounds of force, you can only compact 1 inch at a time. The next step is...
My rule of thumb is do not put a full 6 to 8 inches of gravel in. Put a couple of inches in at a time and compact it. You're going to get the best compaction possible by doing it that way. So say you have 8 inches that you're trying to fill, put in 3 or 4 inches, start compacting, and it'll start coming down, and then lay some more on top to where you're almost ready to find out your final rough grade, and keep compacting it until you get it to where you want it. You can't get any more solid than that. But if you try doing 7, 8 inches all at one time, and there's no compactor that's going to be able to get it down enough to be as solid as you want it to be.
To use a woven or non-woven geotextile fabric. When it comes to our projects, we are primarily using a woven geotextile fabric. This is filaments that are woven together. Woven geotextile does still let water through very slowly, but it's more so for the separation of our subsoil from our base material, so there's no contamination.
So before laying any gravel or crush run, they're putting a filter cloth in between so you don't have that contamination or loss of, so that it doesn't start going through. You lose that soil. So this is going to help with time when these gravels start settling, not to be able to go through into the soils below, and you get your drop in, or pockets of drop in your patio. This will keep it more solid. It's a good practice. A lot of contractors do not use it, but it is a good practice to do if you wanted to have that one more prevention of not having to worry about going back and fix one of your projects that you did because you had these pockets of dip due to the fact that you've lost the gravels underneath.
Between the two of them, as well as a strengthening of our base to spread out the load over a greater area. When we install our geotextile, whether non-woven or woven, we're going to roll it out on our project and ensure that there's at least a 6-inch overlap from piece to piece, and making sure that it's shingling away from the foundation, so that any water that gets on it is going away from the foundation and not going underneath another piece of fabric. So at the foundation of the house is going to be the very top piece on top of everything, and again going away from that foundation. We can then start with our base preparation. Now there's a few different base preparation methods to do here. We can go a traditional base, which is an A gravel. You'll see it as a 3/4 inch angular crushed stone down to fines. And on top of that, we can use a concrete sand, which is a washed concrete product. And this is a traditional base preparation method. Alternatively, we can use an HPB on top of that A gravel. So that is typically a 1/4 inch.
So the sand, he's talking about the two gravels that are going to be used for the sub base or first base. He's talking about granular A or A gravel, and then above it using a concrete sand. No one really uses concrete sand anymore. This HPB is the better use. It allows water to run through completely, which is terrific. It's what you want. Now, as you get to the end of this project and you see that they start using a polymeric sand in the joints anyways, the only water that's going to be getting in is from the outer perimeters. So you're going to be a minimal amount of water that would get through, but you won't get any washout whatsoever if you're using an HPB. And this is my preference here.
Angular crushed clean, which means it's clear, there's no fines in it, washed product,
and it's self-leveling
on top of that A gravel. Or we can go completely open graded base on this install, which is, instead of A gravel 6 to 8 inches, we're going to do a 3/4 inch clear, which is a washed angular crushed stone. And on top of that, we cannot use concrete sand because it'll wash right through. We are going to use that 1/4 inch crushed clear angular chip on top, 1 inch bedding layer. Now for that bedding layer, whether you use concrete sand on top of A gravel or 1/4 inch clear stone, you don't want to go more than just an inch. That is just meant for a leveling layer. Now the purpose of an open graded base is that it allows water to filter through it. In our business, we use in every raised patio installation. It's great to have that water flow all the way through, and you need to have a pipe in it to be able to collect water and exfiltrate it out of the project.
So that's a weeper pipe. So it's got little holes along the length of the pipe, and that'll allow any water that does get in to go into this pipe where it's hollow. It's 4 inch, and it'll just drain out to wherever it is that you've sloped it off to. It's definitely a need behind a step if need be, or in this case, a patio where it's got a raised retainer, and you want that water, any water that holds up, to get out so it does not end up flawing your project.
Wherever that may be and however that may be, whether it's exiting through a wall or it's exiting through and then a pop-up emitter somewhere in the yard. Now, the final base preparation method would be to use a synthetic base, which actually minimizes the amount you would be excavating in your project. Instead of a traditional 6 to 8 inch base, you would excavate just for that 1 inch bedding layer, 3/4 of an inch for the synthetic base material, and then your paver. That height, which is typically somewhere around 4 inches, depending on the height of your paver. Now, this cannot be used for a driveway installation, though there is a driveway installation synthetic base product out on the market. I have not yet.
So I don't know if I'm repeating myself or not, but I don't use those pads. I've never used them in the past. I heard they're great. They do save on having to dig as deep, but I think it's more for the DIY projects myself. But you know, who am I to say? If you use them on your projects, terrific. And if they hold up, that's even better.
Used it in my business. In my business, we typically do a traditional base install with a gravel base material of 12 to 14 inches, and then an HPB or a 1/4 inch crushed clear stone bedding layer for driveways. For walk.
Now, instead of the gravel, you could use a crusher run. I like the crusher run. It's got a stone and lime mixture. It's solid enough that it compacts phenomenally, and it keeps everything solid, but it still has a little bit of water drainage in it. And if you use the HPB on top of that, you should have no worries about any water being held up underneath the pavers.
Walkways, patios, we're typically going to do a synthetic base if it's on grade, and an open graded base if it's a raised patio situation. Now, like we said, depending on our compaction equipment available, we are going to do certain lifts of our material. If we're using a 3/4 inch clear stone, we can typically get away with a little bit more of lifts in that, but it still does need.
So if you figured out already, the most important part of every project is going to be your base, what you don't see, what the homeowner isn't going to see. It's the most important part, because that's what's going to save your project from failing. You are going to pay all the attention in the world to that. And then the second part, which is the part that everybody's going to see, is the finished product. You also want your factor of detail, where you're precise in your cuts. But right now, so much time is being spent in this video on the base, because it is the most important part, in my opinion, of any project.
To be compacted. If you're using a gravel, you'll want to wet that down, not too much water so that it makes it a muddy mess, but enough that you can firmly grasp a good handful of it and it somewhat stays stable in your hand.
So what we'll do is we'll spread out the gravel, and then we'll spray a mist of water on top of it. It helps when you're tamping for dust to fly everywhere, because it is pretty dusty when you got the tamper going. A spray of, or a mist of water on top helps exactly what you're looking at there, for it to compact and get together almost like a cement, but loosely enough that water will still run through it, because there's no compound in it to solidify. But also to keep the dust down. So wet it down as you're about to tamp it.
And as a ball, a good enough amount of moisture to allow for that compaction to be done in certain lifts, depending on your project, on your compaction equipment available. Now, typically we do a compaction of the perimeter and going into the middle, followed by a compaction going up and down or side to side and we do 2 passes for our equipment and possibly more if need be. Now in the middle of our lifts, what we typically install is a biaxial geogrid. It's got strength in both directions. What this does is it helps to stabilize our base material and spread out the load over a wider area. This is optional, but we find it's cheap insurance for our business to install this. It provides our client more value and sets us apart from our competition. We continue our base preparation until we get to that final 1 inch of bedding layer. We can measure from our string lines down to make sure that we are 2 3/8 of an inch of that paver height, if that's the height of the paver we're using, plus that inch bedding layer, so 3 3/8 of an inch from the top of that string line to ensure that we are there all over our patio and that we are uniform.
The sub base is really important because you do not, even if you use the sand for a final base, or if you use HPB, you do not want too much HPB because it too can shift on you. So you want your first base to be almost spot on where you want it before your final grade of screed. So if it's a 7 or 8 inch base that you're using, try getting it as level to where you want the final grade to be. This way, when you're putting down your screed, which might be the HPB in my opinion, the better of the two, then you're almost there, and you're not going to use much more than an inch, inch and a quarter at max throughout the entire project. Pretty equal, actually, pretty equal throughout the entire project.
Form in that slope
As a final
with
grade.
our base preparation. That's when we know we are ready to start screeding. So when we start screeding, we use a 3/4 inch steel screed pipe that you can get pretty much at any home improvement place. They come in 5-10 foot lengths, and we use these to screed out our layer. So their outside diameter is actually 1 inch. So it's that perfect amount for us when we're screeding. And when we're screeding, we're starting at the foundation. We're leveling out our pipes based on our string line. So at our foundation, if we're level at the foundation, our pipes are actually level, but they're following the slope going away from the house. So we can always lay out our pipes.
So if he's got it sloping away over here, then that means you know that this has to be down deep enough that it won't fail, as to say, have a gapping underneath. If this was a step, you want that level right across, and you're going to be sloping this way. But in this case, it's a retaining wall for a garden, it looks like, and the slope is going this way towards the driveway. So that's why you're going to see it more of the retaining wall here than you will over here, because that's the way the slope is going. But you still need this deep enough. You know, he may even have another course underneath here to make sure that he's deep enough prior to his final lay, which seems to be at that line right there anyway, so it looks like he's okay. I'm not sure if this is the size of paver he's got. That much more is actually buried, so that's going to be a nice solid retaining wall, and he'll have no worries about how much slope he needs to get down to this level.
And then measure down from our string line to make sure that we are just that height of the paver, 2 3/8 from the top of string line down to pipe. And that gives us our 1 inch bedding layer, which is our pipe, to our 2 3/8, which is top of paver. And now we're going to continue screeding out our project, following our string lines with those pipes.
So if the highest point is along the house and the lowest point is down at the back end, when he puts his level across from this pole to that pole, it should always be level. So that these 2 lines, or actually 4 lines if you go right across, if you could see it, but these 2 poles, when he puts his level on and he's pulling it, that'll be level, because where it's not going to be level is from that end to this end. But from side to side, that should be level as he's pulling, which his poles will automatically determine that once you predetermine the slope on your poles.
From one end of the patio to the other. And when we're done this, we can fill in where our pipes have left indents with further bedding material, and we're ready to lay our project. Now, depending on our patio paver design, we typically have a border followed by a field of pavers for the entire project. So we can start with laying our border stone and then start laying our field out from that border. When we lay, we're typically laying string lines to ensure that each row or
So in this case, he's talking about this being his border. So he's pre-laid his border. It's a different color and it's a different size than the lay is. But they still have to line up in height. So if this is 2 3/8, 2 3/4, 3 1/8, if this this is the lay, they should be the same thickness of paver. If it's not, then you're going to have to compensate for one or the other in your height. And the way he's got this laid right now, this border is considered a soldier course by the way it's being laid. Soldier border in this case.
or however many.
If it was on the length, in other words, let's say this is a 6x12 paver. If he was going this way, so its length head to toe would be considered a sailor course. But because he's gone side to side on the 12-inch length, 12, 12, 12, it's a soldier course.
Rows are nice and straight, following nice straight lines to ensure quality laying.
You'll hear that terminology determined more so on a driveway where you got a soldier course or a sailor course. But in the way of measurement for the sake of figuring out your materials quantities, and he's got two different colors, he needs to determine if it's going to be laid as a soldier course or a sailor course. And that's why I'm telling you this right now, because when you need to get your measurements of quantities, you want to know which way that paver is going to be laying.
Project. And when we lay it, we typically, instead of laying the stone and dragging it across the bedding layer, we'll lay it, click it against the top of the stones, and then slowly put it down into the bedding material. Any cuts that need to be done can be done. If we have a curved patio or walkway, what we're going to do is we're going to lay past our curve, and then we're going to draw a line for our curve using whatever we want, some conduit piping, some plastic edge restraint, or whatever you may have, or even laying your border on top to get that curve, drawing a line, kicking those back, and then starting our cuts along that line, kicking out the cut pieces to dispose of, and putting our border in place for that.
I like the garden hose because you see this flat that he's got here, and then all of a sudden it turns right. He probably laid his pavers down and ended up with the flat. If he had a hose on here, he could actually have seen that that is a flat line there, and he could have tweaked that out with the hose and gotten more of a shape on it.
Now that our patio project is laid, we can then start thinking about our edge restraint. Now, edge restraint is going to prevent lateral movement of our project. It's going to keep it nice and in place. When we are talking about an open graded base, we are going to use a concrete edge restraint. What we're going to do is we're going to scrape away that 1-inch bedding layer, and then we're going to do a tapered concrete edge restraint up to 1 inch up the paver. So it's covering that 1-inch bedding layer plus 1 inch up our paver to give us a nice concrete toe to retain those pavers.
That's a great practice. If you choose to do that, it's great, but keep in mind that this bed of cement that he's putting along the outside can break as well. If it's a plastic paver edge or aluminum paver edge with 10-inch spikes, that works just as good in my opinion. I've seen more projects fail using the concrete that I've gone to repair because either they didn't put enough concrete in as a retainer, or for whatever reason, too much water, not enough water, where it fails. Whereas with the manufactured product of a pave edge, it shouldn't fail on you and it should last. And if you install it properly with the 10-inch spikes at the height where it needs to be, you will not have any problems, in my opinion.
If we're using a synthetic base method or an A-gravel base method, we're going to do the same thing. A-gravel, we're going to scrape away our bedding material, whether we use concrete sand or 1/4-inch chip. and then we're going to install our plastic edge restraint.
That's the edge restraint.
And hammer in a spike every foot or every 6 inches if it's a curved patio design. These spikes are meant to actually corrode and hold on to the fines in the base material. This prevents them from pushing up, and you'll see those plastic edge restraints being exposed when those do push up. Now, this still does not prevent it 100%. You still see these plastic edge restraint products heaving and whatnot. So we are moving.
But you see, he still has pulled away, or he's gone to the top of the base, and it's still holding back the screeding. So you're going to get right down to the top of the A gravel. You're not going to sit it on top of the HPB.
To a concrete edge restraint product for most of our installs in our business.
Properly and holds it back properly.
To a synthetic base install, we are still using a plastic edge restraint because they come with these anchor screws that screw in and really tightly snap into the synthetic base panels, which creates a pretty awesome connection. Finally, after that's all said and done, we're ready for our jointing compound. This is what's going to make sure that our interlock is nice and solidly in place with one another. We're typically using a polymeric sand for this install. Now, every polymeric sand is different. You're going to want to consult with the manufacturer or read the bag very thoroughly to make sure that you're installing this correctly, because this...
When you do lay the polymeric sand, these joint lines that are going horizontal and vertical, you want to go on an angle to get that sand in to the depth that it needs to go and go in solid. So you're not following the lines, you're not following through to try getting it in there. You're actually going in on an angle, on a diagonal. And then after, when you're ready to actually spray water on top of it, I would suggest blowing it off with the leaf blower, which looks like he's got back here, to get the dust fines off of it. And this way it doesn't stick to the pavers. You get a cleaner look at the end.
Can be easily installed incorrectly. Typically, this involves spreading out a bag, sweeping no more than 10 feet in any direction from that bag to ensure that those polymers are staying at a good ratio to the sand. After that, you're going to make sure that you sweep off that surface nicely, and then you're going to consolidate with a vibratory plate compactor. And you're going to see that that consolidates.
You saw how it went down when he ran with the tamper on it. So once he's tamped it once you've tamped it once, and gone through and made sure that it's all the polymeric sand has gone down as deep as it could, then you're going to give it one more final sweep with the polymeric.
The polymeric sands to the bottom of the stone, which is incredibly important and cannot be skipped, or it will lead to a failure of your polymeric sand. You will see quite a bit of consolidation of that material, so you can then go ahead and sweep in more polymeric sand to top up, and coming to 1/8 of an inch of the chamfer or 1/8 of an inch to the top of paver. That is also really important to take into factor, because with traffic traveling over top of these pavers will start to erode away at that polymeric sand if it's topped up too much, and will lead to failure as well. Finally, if you need to, you can continue that consolidation and top up process until you get to that point of 1/8 of an inch below the chamfer or top of paver, and then you can continue with the watering phase of installing the polymeric sand, which is going to differ from manufacturer to manufacturer, so be sure to consult with the manufacturer or the back of the bag for installation instructions.
So I'm backing up a bit and
with the watering phase of installing the polymeric sand, which is going to differ from
where he has left the sod pulled back so he can bring it forward. It's a good trick too. If you're able to save it, it'll usually die on you by the time you finish your project. But remember I said earlier, save some of your soils.
So be sure to consult with the...
So you're gonna have all that exposed now, and you wanna marry it with the existing sod and soil that's here. If this is too destroyed, you're gonna wanna cut it out and just put a whole new roll. But that soil that I said to save, not to get rid of all the soils, that's where you're going to fill it back in order to get this to look as a complete project, a finished project.
Manufacturer or the back of the bag for installation instructions. Other jointing compounds include a basic sand jointing compound that you can then seal with a joint stabilizing sealer to ensure that that's going to stay in place. If you do not add that joint stabilizing sealer, that will wash out over time. Weeds will take hold of that quite easily, so that is another option for you. Another option is a resin-based jointing compound. There's a few of them on the market right now. These go in for non-vehicular traffic projects, and they go in by basically opening the product, pouring it out, and immediately wetting it, and wetting it to consolidate and to get that product down to the bottom of the joints, and continuously going around your project and doing so. It is an air cure product, so you do not want to let it cure to the top of stones, and you're going to want to make sure that you've washed out any residue on the top of stones so that it does not cure on top of the stones and leave stains.
I've never used that product. If you've ever done a grouting job on tiles, if you don't get that grout off perfectly, and a tile could have a porcelain finish, you've got a natural stone or you got a concrete product, patio stone, such as this, that is porous. If you don't get that off completely, you're going to get these smudges on the whole patio for a long time. So it would drive me nuts trying to get this all cleaned up and not having to worry about, did I get it all off? Especially if I'm going to seal the pavers and the polymeric later on, or the sand in this, the joint sand in this case, as a preventative. It would drive me nuts knowing that this is still not 100% clean. So I'm not big on that product myself.
Are a couple resin-based products that have a two-part mixing process that are for vehicular and commercial projects on the market that you can check out as well. After that, you're going to top up the sides with topsoil, build up anywhere you need to, not a significant amount, and that is the end of your paver patio.
And that's it, guys. So that wraps it up. We hope you enjoyed this, and you can always refer back to this video at any time, and I suggest you do so if you're not understanding any part of it whatsoever. If you do, then the rest is going to be easy when we get on to the next section, where I explain all these materials again. So it's kind of repetitive. This is a great video to show you all the products and how they're used. Until we see you again, on the next section we go.